I caught in the moment he smiled. It wasn't just pride. It wasn't even arrogance. It was possession. That slick little grin Philip flashed at the press during the opening of my life's work, our Indigenous Heritage exhibition, told me everything I needed to know. He thought he owned it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I stood beside the ceremonial mask of the Northern Plateau, a piece I'd spent 32 years tracking down, preserving, and authenticating. Behind it hung woven textiles, obsidian tools, sacred items entrusted to me by elders who had every right to never trust a white-haired academic again. I'd earned those artifacts with time, with humility, with truth. And Philip, he was selling them like antique furniture. That night was supposed to be a celebration. Indigenous Peoples Day, October 14th. I had poured 3 decades of field work, grants, and relationships into this exhibit. The museum wing had been renamed after me, the Jeremy Grant Cultural Legacy Hall. The dedication plaques still had that fresh-polished glow. But as the wine flowed and guests circled the displays snapping photos, I overheard Philip bragging to a group of donors near the glass case, holding the crow pipe bundle. "Yeah," he said, swirling his glass like some Sotheby's auctioneer. "Private collector in Geneva. 5 mil easy. We wrapped the paperwork through an old university archive. Clean as bone. Clean as bone." I nearly dropped my wine. Philip had always been ambitious, too ambitious. He was my late sister's son. I took him in after she passed, gave him an internship, tried to teach him integrity. But somewhere along the way, he learned how to mimic sincerity instead. I ducked away from the crowd and headed to the back office, my fingers trembling as I unlocked the file cabinet. The original provenance records were supposed to be sealed, logged, and untouched. But they weren't untouched. They were replaced. Forged. The ink was wrong. The dates were doctored. Worse, some of the tribal authorizations had been completely fabricated. What Philip had done wasn't just illegal. It was sacrilege. I sat there alone, in that tiny room lined with the ghosts of generations, and something inside me went cold. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was stealing from them, from the ones whose stories I was supposed to protect. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Later that night, I called my daughter Heather. She was 28, whip-smart, and working on her own PhD in museum ethics. She picked up on the second ring. "Heather," I said, "I need your help." "What happened?" "I think Philip forged the transfer documents, and I think he's trying to sell the collection." Dead silence on the other end. Then, "Do you have proof?" "Not yet, but I'm going to find it, and when I do, we burn him." She exhaled. "Tell me what you need." By morning, we had a plan. But just as I returned to the exhibit to begin digging into the museum server logs, I saw something that stopped me cold. A new placard. It wasn't there yesterday. Private ownership transfer in progress, collection reserved. And at the bottom, authorized by Dr. Jeremy Grant. My name. Falsified. The site of my own name, etched onto a placard authorizing the sale of the collection, stopped me cold. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, a mislabeled display, a curatorial error. But when I leaned in closer, my stomach turned. The signature beneath the authorization line? It looked just like mine. Same loops, same sharp hooks on the J and the J. But I never signed it. Someone had forged my name, and I knew exactly who. I stormed into the exhibit's side office and slammed the door behind me. The same cabinet I had opened last night now had a different lock code. Changed. Locked. Tampered with. I pulled out my old key card, tried it, denied. That little bastard had locked me out of my own files. I called Heather. She was already halfway to the museum with a burner laptop, 2 flash drives, and an expression I'd come to recognize from her mother. Quiet fury with purpose. She arrived in minutes and immediately got to work on the IT terminal in the conservation lab. "The security logs are encrypted," she muttered, fingers flying. "But whoever did this used the director override account. It's linked to your ID, but the login timestamp is off." "How off?" 2:13 a.m. last night. I frowned. I was asleep. At home. with a pulled-back muscle and a heating pad the size of Texas. Heather smiled. Exactly. That's your alibi. Within an hour, she pulled the access logs, traced the IP address, and matched the security footage. At 2:13 a.m., someone entered the museum using a generic staff badge. The camera angle was poor, but there was one clear frame. Philip, wearing gloves, holding a folder. He'd used a proxy login under my name, uploaded forged documents, and labeled the exhibit as transferable. That would make it easier to slide it to a buyer without the board noticing until it was too late. I felt sick, not just because of what he did, but because of how easily he did it. I had opened every door for him, and he picked the locks anyway. Heather looked at me. We can still stop this, but we'll need more than IP logs. We need to expose it publicly. How? Start with the internal board. Leak the forgery. Make it impossible for them to stay quiet. I nodded, but something still nagged at me. Why now? Why would Philip suddenly risk everything? Then I remembered the Geneva buyer. Heather confirmed it. The $5 million offer was real. Not just real, but timed. The buyer had given a deadline. Proof of ownership by October 16th, or the deal fell through. That gave us 2 days. 2 days to gather evidence. 2 days to destroy his narrative. 2 days to reclaim the legacy he tried to sell. But just as Heather was pulling copies of the forged PDFs from the museum server, she froze. Dad, you need to see this. She turned the screen. It was a private email chain between Philip and the museum's director of collections, Stephanie Blackwell. Subject line: finalize sale details, destroy backup records. And the last line: if Jeremy gets suspicious, make sure he's removed before the board meeting. Removed, fired, discredited, or something worse. I looked at Heather. We just ran out of time. I had 2 days to stop the sale, and now I knew Stephanie Blackwell was in on it. I always had my doubts about her. Museum politics are like anthropology in reverse. You spend less time digging for truth and more time burying it. Stephanie played the long game, smooth with donors, stone-faced with staff, loyal only to whatever kept her at the top of the org chart. But forging transfer records? Conspiring to erase institutional proof? That was new territory, and now she wanted me removed. I didn't wait. I marched straight to her office on the 4th floor. Stephanie, I said, not bothering to knock. She looked up from her desk, fake surprise written all over her face. Jeremy, I heard you had concerns about some of the exhibit documents. Is everything okay? Cut the performance, I said. I've seen the emails, the fake placards, the 2 a.m. login under my credentials. I know you're working with Philip. For half a second, she dropped the mask. Then it was back. You're mistaken, she said coolly. Those were internal logistical discussions. Misunderstandings. Destroy backup records isn't a misunderstanding. It's evidence tampering. She stood. Jeremy, I know how emotional this must be. You're nearing retirement. Maybe all of this is feeling personal. You're damn right it's personal. You're trying to sell my life's work behind my back. Her lips curled slightly. Not behind her back. With your signature. I stepped closer. I'm bringing this to the board. She didn't flinch. Then I'll have no choice but to report your mental instability during the exhibit's planning stages. You've been forgetful, paranoid. You've even accused staff of theft in the past. I'll provide the memos. My blood ran cold. They weren't just trying to remove me. They were building a case to make me look delusional. Heather was right. We had to go public. Fast. I left without another word. Back in the archives room, Heather had already decrypted several hidden folders on the internal server. It's worse than we thought, she said. There's a shell LLC Philip created in Delaware. It's listed as the Cultural Transfer Authority for the Geneva buyer. She showed me the name. KRJ Holdings. K for Kristen, the museum's acquisitions officer. R for Richard, a major donor who consulted on collection strategy. J for Jeremy. My name. Again, they built an entire false transfer company and named it to look legitimate using my initials. Heather stared at me. They built a lie using your reputation. I sat down slowly. They weren't just committing fraud. They were framing me to take the fall. I leaned back, thinking. We needed a witness. Someone on the inside. Someone who hadn't yet sold their soul. Then I remembered Edward, one of the senior archivists. Honest to the bone, old school, and loyal to the preservation mission above everything else. I called him. Edward, it's Jeremy. I need to talk. It's urgent. His voice was shaky. Jeremy, I was just about to call you. Why? They know I found the unaltered accession logs. The ones that prove you never authorized anything. What happened? I think someone's following me. My heart dropped. Where are you right now? He started to say. Then the line went dead. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, heart pounding. Edward wasn't the type to panic. He was calm, methodical, one of the few people I trusted implicitly. If he was scared, it meant something was very wrong. I tried calling him back, straight to voicemail. Damn it, I muttered. Heather looked up from the computer. What happened? Edward. He had the original accession logs, the clean ones. Said he was being followed. Then the call dropped. Her eyes widened. You think they're silencing him? They're trying to erase the chain of custody. I said, if those original records disappear, they'll say my memory is failing and that I fabricated the whole story. Heather's voice was sharp. Then we find Edward. Now, we traced his phone location using a security app one had installed last year when the museum issued staff phones. It pinged his last known spot, a parking structure 2 blocks from the museum. We rushed there. Edward's car was still parked on level 3. His briefcase was on the passenger seat. But no Edward, and no logs. Heather checked the timestamp on the GPS. His phone went offline 22 minutes ago. I scanned the lot. Empty. Too quiet. Then I noticed the security camera above the stairwell. Back at the museum, I pulled a favor with one of the security guards. He gave us access to the footage. We watched as Edward walked toward his car. Then, an SUV pulled up behind him. Tinted windows. 2 men stepped out, faces obscured. One held something in his hand. Edward paused. The screen glitched. When it came back, the SUV was gone. And so was Edward. Heather's voice cracked. We need to go to the police. We can't, I said. Not yet. We need everything. If we go in half prepared, Philip will flip the story before we can stop him. She hesitated. Then what? I looked her dead in the eyes. We play their game. I pulled out my old leather-bound field notebook, the one I hadn't used in years. Time to start taking notes like a man who didn't plan on forgetting anything again. That night, I got a message from an unknown number. One line. You're next, Professor. You're next, Professor. The message sat on my screen like a loaded weapon. No signature. No number. Just the promise of consequences for pushing too far. Well, I was already in too deep to turn back. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced the living room, Heather watching from the couch, her laptop still glowing as she archived every email, every server log, every surveillance frame. If something happened to me, if they made me disappear like Edward, she'd carry the torch. And if something happened to her, I didn't let myself think about it. By morning, I made a decision. I was done being reactive. It was time to go on offense. First, I called the one journalist I knew I could trust, Stephanie Rios, a cultural affairs reporter I'd worked with during a land dispute case back in the 90s. She had a nose for corruption and a fire that never went out. Jeremy, she said groggy, it's barely 7. I've got a story for you. One that'll make your career and blow a hole in the museum world. There was a pause. Go on. We met at a small diner downtown. I gave her everything. The forged placard, the IP logs, the private LLC, even the email with my name on it. When I finished, she looked pale. You realize what you're accusing them of, right? Fraud, theft, conspiracy. If you're wrong, I'm not. She studied me. And if you are, they'll bury you. Not just professionally. I've already been warned, I said quietly. They made Edward vanish. I'm next. That got her attention. She agreed to dig, promised to keep it quiet until we had more. Back at the museum, Heather had cracked into an old backup server, one even Philip didn't know existed. There, hidden in an outdated subfolder, was the Holy Grail, the original cataloging entries, time-stamped, verified, signed by me and Edward, unaltered. Heather smiled. This is our weapon. We don't use it yet, I said. Not until the board meeting tomorrow. That's when Philip plans to finalize the sale. She nodded. We take them down in public. But just then, her phone buzzed. A text. She read it and went white. What is it? I asked. She turned the screen to me. It was a photo of her apartment. Windows smashed. Inside, completely ransacked. Beneath it, a message. Back off, Heather. Or next time, you'll be home. Heather's hands were shaking. I took her phone and stared at the image. Glass scattered across her floor. Drawers torn out. Papers everywhere. The message beneath it made my blood run cold. Back off, Heather. Or next time, you'll be home. They weren't even pretending anymore. She looked at me, her voice low but firm. We can't stop now. They want us to panic. I nodded, though my chest ached with guilt. You shouldn't have been dragged into this. Heather gave me that look, the one her mother used to give when I underestimated her. This is my heritage too, Dad. I'm not backing down. I placed a call to Detective Marcus Bell, an old friend from my university security liaison team. He owed me a favor from years ago, an internal theft case I helped resolve without press involvement. He met us within the hour, reviewed the photos, and took a sworn statement from Heather. His jaw clenched tighter with every detail we shared. This is organized, he muttered. Professional. They're covering their tracks and trying to scare you off. It's working, I said, but not in the way they think. Marcus offered temporary protection for Heather and promised to look into Edward's disappearance more aggressively. We both knew that if Edward had been harmed, it would take more than museum policy to bring his story to light. Meanwhile, I had one more card to play. Philip's arrogance had always been his weakness. He liked attention. He liked power. And more than anything, he loved controlling the narrative. So I decided to break it. I scheduled a private meeting with Kristen, the museum's acquisitions officer, one of the three initials behind the KRJ Shell Company. Unlike Stephanie, Kristen was cautious, quieter, and not nearly as good at hiding nerves. We met in the courtyard behind the museum's research wing. Jeremy, she said, arms folded tightly, if this is about your accusations. I'm not here to accuse, I said. I'm here to give you one chance. She blinked. Excuse me. You're involved in KRJ Holdings. I have the documents, the money trail, the emails, and I know Philip used your credentials to move artifacts through the university archive. Her face went pale. I leaned in. If you testify at tomorrow's board meeting, you might walk away clean. If not, you go down with him. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I left her there, stunned and sweating. Back home, Heather and I built our presentation for the board, PDFs, screenshots, the original accession logs, even a voice memo we'd found of Philip bragging during a Zoom call about his Swiss deal. We backed up everything to 3 separate drives. One went in Heather's bag, one to Detective Bell, one to a secure cloud. We were ready. Until midnight. That's when I got the call. Block number. A man's voice. Calm. Cold. Tomorrow, if you speak, your daughter disappears next. If you speak tomorrow, your daughter disappears next. The voice was flat, professional, as if they were telling me the weather. Then the line went dead. I sat frozen in my office, the glow from the desk lamp suddenly feeling far too dim. Outside, wind rattled the windows. My hands, which once held ancient arrowheads with reverence, now shook with helplessness. They weren't bluffing. Whoever these people were, Philip's buyers, the museum insiders, or some hired muscle, they had already made Edward vanish. Now they were looking at Heather, and I had to decide. I didn't sleep. I just watched her as she sat across the room, reviewing our files for the board meeting. She was focused, calm, more determined than I'd ever seen her. I wanted to protect her. I also wanted to finish what I started. At dawn, I brewed coffee and walked outside with the drive marked Final Copy. I stood at the edge of the property line and buried it 6 inches into the dirt under the rose bush her mother planted the year she was born. If anything happened to me, that drive held enough evidence to finish this. By 8 a.m., Heather and I sat in the museum boardroom. 12 members. Half of them knew me for 30 years. The rest, Philip had been charming over the last 2. Philip himself entered last. Slick suit. Fresh shave. Like he'd already won. He barely looked at me. Just smiled as he sat at the head of the table and opened his laptop. Stephanie sat to his left. Kristen to his right, visibly pale, avoiding eye contact. "Let's begin," Stephanie said. "Today's vote concerns the potential asset liquidation to the Geneva Foundation. Dr. Grant has requested the floor before the board proceeds." I stood slowly. My throat was dry. I looked at Heather, who gave me a nod. Then I looked at Philip, and I sat back down. The room shifted. Gasps. Glances. Heather stared at me, confused. Hurt. I didn't speak. I said nothing. And the vote proceeded. 9-3. Approved. $5 million. 30 years of my work. An entire sacred history, boxed and sold. Heather walked out before the meeting ended. She didn't say a word. I caught up with her outside the museum. "Heather." She turned, furious. "You let them win. They threatened you." Her voice broke. "You think I didn't know? You think I wasn't ready?" Tears welled in her eyes. "You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself from losing me." I reached out. She stepped back. "I'm done, Dad." And just like that, she was gone. That night, alone in my office, I received a new message. An audio file. I hit play. It was Edward's voice. Weak. Terrified. "Jeremy, if you're hearing this, I don't have much time." Edward's voice crackled through the speakers, barely above a whisper. "Jeremy, if you're hearing this, I don't have much time. They took my phone, but I managed to stash this recorder in my jacket lining." I froze. My heart kicked into overdrive. They're keeping me in some kind of storage facility. Concrete walls, no windows. I think I'm near the city. I heard trains. Twice a day. Same time. Morning and late afternoon. They want me to sign a statement saying the logs were faked. That you orchestrated everything. I wouldn't. There was a cough. A pause. "If they find this recorder, it's over. If you get this, please don't let them erase it all. Don't let him win. Philip, he's not just selling the artifacts. He's selling access. Private buyers. Black market deals. Sacred items meant for repatriation. Gone. Then static. Then silence. I played it twice more before copying the file to 2 backup drives. Heather needed to hear this. I called her. No answer. I texted. No response. Can't blame her, I thought. I'd betrayed her trust. But this changed everything. I sent the audio file to her with one line. "Edward's alive. And Philip's doing more than we thought." Then I called Detective Marcus Bell. He picked up on the first ring. When I told him about the recording, I could practically hear him sit up straight. "I'll trace industrial buildings near the train line. You forward that file to me now." Done. Within an hour, he had 5 possible locations. "Give me the night," he said. "If he's there, I'll find him." Meanwhile, I took a step I should have taken days ago. I sent the file to Stephanie Rios, the reporter. "Run it," I wrote. "Run everything." This wasn't about careers anymore, or legacy, or revenge. This was about stopping something rotten before it spread any further. By evening, Heather replied. One message. "Come to Mom's rose bush. Bring gloves." I smiled despite the storm still hanging over us. We met under gray skies. Heather dug. I uncovered the drive. She held it in her palm, stared at it. "Why now?" she asked. "Why send it to the press after backing out?" I took a breath. Because fear only wins when it isolates you. And I'm done being alone in this. She nodded once. "Then let's burn it all down." We walked together back to the museum, back to the truth. But before we reached the door, my phone buzzed. It was Detective Bell. He only said one word. Got him. Edward looked like he had aged 20 years in 9 days. Detective Bell found him zip-tied to a chair in an abandoned textile warehouse outside the city. No windows, just a broken radio, a bucket of water, and 2 folding chairs. One for Edward, the other, I assumed, for whoever came to convince him to lie. But they didn't succeed. He refused to sign. Even bruised, dehydrated, and barely able to speak, he refused to hand over history to liars. When I walked into the hospital room and he saw me, Edward tried to sit up. "Don't," I said, rushing to his side. "Just breathe. You did more than enough." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I kept it safe," he whispered. "The Ledger original accessions. I hid them in the old microfilm cabinet, behind the floor panel. Museum storage room 7. Heather and I exchanged a look. That storage room had been marked decommissioned for over a decade. Nobody ever went there. We left the hospital and headed straight to the museum. Heather used her access card to bypass the public wings. Lights flickered as we descended into the belly of the archives. Room 7 was cold and still. Dust covered everything. But behind the last row of cabinets, just where Edward said, a loose floor tile lifted to reveal a shallow recess. Inside, wrapped in a weatherproof envelope, the original ledger. Handwritten, time-stamped, signed by both Edward and me. It was the artifact registry that proved, without question, that every transfer document signed by me was a fake. We now had it all. Philip's scheme, the forged documents, the recordings, Edward's testimony, the black market shell company, the board manipulation, and now the real registry. Heather clutched it like it was made of gold. He can't escape this. But I wasn't so sure. Back upstairs, Stephanie Rios was waiting near the rear service doors. Her face was pale. "We've got a problem," she said. "What kind of problem?" I asked. "They leaked something." Heather and I stared at her. Stephanie continued. "An anonymous packet, sent to my editor, the museum board, and a few select donors. Photos of you, Jeremy, sitting with a buyer in Geneva, timestamped 2 years ago." My blood ran cold. "Impossible. I've never." "I know," she said, "but to the untrained eye, it looks like you've been part of this from the start." Heather stepped forward. "They're framing him again." Stephanie nodded. "They're trying to kill the story before it breaks. Your credibility is the last thing holding their dam together." I stared at her. "Then we don't whisper it," I said. "We shout it." Stephanie raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" I pulled out the drive from my coat. "The press conference happens tomorrow morning, and I want every camera in the state watching." But just as we turned to leave, Heather's phone rang. One word on the screen. "Philip." Heather stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the green button. "Don't answer," I said, but she already had. "Hello," she said sharply. Philip's voice came through, smooth as glass. "Heather, I thought maybe you'd be smarter than your father." My fists clenched. "Where is he?" Philip asked. "Still chasing ghosts? Still trying to impress you with some noble crusade while he drags you into ruin?" Heather didn't flinch. "You kidnapped Edward." That's a big word for what was really just persuasion. "He's fine, isn't he? No harm done. You forged documents. You tried to erase Indigenous history for profit." "You say that like anyone cares," Philip snapped. "You know how this ends. The press can't tell real from fake anymore. And when the smoke clears, the board will believe what they're paid to believe. That I'm the adult in the room. That your father, well, he's the emotional relic clinging to a past that's already sold." Heather looked at me. I gave a single nod. Time to flip the script. She put the call on speaker. "You done, Philip?" she asked. "Hardly." "Good, because now it's my turn." She held her phone up to the laptop and hit play on Edward's voice recording. The room went silent, except for Edward's trembling words, naming names, describing his captivity, exposing the Geneva connection. Philip didn't speak. Not a breath. Then the line clicked. Call ended. Heather exhaled. He knows he's finished. I shook my head. Not yet, but we've got him cornered. Tomorrow we end this. We spent the night preparing. Every file, photo, and statement organized by timestamp. We brought in a lawyer, a tribal representative who had long questioned the museum's ethics, and even 2 young curators who resigned earlier that month quietly, after suspecting internal fraud. By morning, the museum's auditorium was packed with press. Stephanie Rios took the podium first. Then Edward, bruises still visible but voice stronger than ever. Then Heather. And finally me. I held the ledger high. This book, I said, is the truth. And for too long, men like Philip used the shadows to rewrite that truth for profit. But today, the shadows don't get the final word. Reporters scribbled. Cameras flashed. A collective silence settled over the room. Until, from the back row, a voice yelled, "This whole thing's a setup. You're the liar, Grant." Philip. He stood with his lawyer beside him, waving a thick folder. "I've filed a defamation suit. You and your daughter will be discredited in 24 hours. And that," he pointed to the ledger, "is stolen property." Stephanie Rios stood, turning her camera toward him. Heather stepped up to the mic. "Actually, Philip," she reached into her bag, "you signed off on its preservation yourself. 2 years ago." She held up the document. His signature. His authorization. Philip went pale. Then his lawyer whispered something, and they walked out. But as they passed me, Philip leaned close. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "You have no idea what's coming." After Philip stormed out of the auditorium, the room erupted, reporters calling questions, cameras flashing, board members whispering furiously into their phones. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt hunted. Heather and I stood side by side under the hot glare of the press lights. She didn't show it, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew Philip wasn't finished. He never walked away without a backup plan. Stephanie Rios approached us after the conference. "You took down a major figure in the museum world today," she said, voice low. "He's going to want blood." "I know," I said. "What now?" "We wait," I answered, though my gut told me we wouldn't be waiting long. We spent the next 2 days giving statements. Heather was called in by the Tribal Advisory Council to help draft recommendations on repatriation policy. I reconnected with institutions I hadn't spoken to in years, tribes, curators, old colleagues, rebuilding the bridges Philip tried to burn. But then strange things began happening. My university email was locked out. Heather received an official notice from the ethics board about a formal complaint regarding data tampering. Our cloud backups were suddenly inaccessible. We weren't being attacked in public anymore. We were being erased quietly. Death by bureaucracy. On the 3rd night, I came home to find an envelope taped to my front door. Inside, a printed email chain between the museum board and a private investigator, someone hired to dig into my finances, Heather's academic records, and Edward's hospital file. The last line, "We go after their credibility. No witnesses, no legacy." I felt the old rage return, not hot and explosive, but cold, focused. Philip hadn't just created a network of corruption. He had built a system, one that could operate without him. I called Heather. "We need to move," I said. "Now." "To where?" "Back to the beginning. The Geneva connection. The real buyer. If we found who Philip was answering to, we could blow this wide open." Heather had a contact, Brittany, an old grad school colleague working with Cultural Heritage Task Force in Switzerland. She owed Heather a favor. That night, we sent everything to her: ledgers, forged docs, Edward's testimony, transaction records. Within 6 hours, she responded. "Jeremy, I've seen that buyer name before. KRJ Holdings isn't a buyer. It's a front. The real owner behind the $5 million deal is listed in a sealed fund registry." I messaged back instantly. "Who?" A minute later, her reply came. Just one name. Marcus Bell. Marcus Bell. I stared at the name on the screen, each letter hitting harder than the last. Detective. Friend. Confidant. He'd been with me from the start, offering protection, investigating Edward's disappearance, helping us trace threats. But he wasn't helping. He was watching, monitoring, controlling just enough to keep us believing we had the upper hand, while funneling every move we made back to the people behind it all. Heather stood behind me, reading the email over my shoulder. "No," she whispered. "That can't be right." I didn't answer, because deep down I already knew. I thought about every meeting, every conversation, every time Marcus showed up, just when we needed him. He wasn't our shield. He was our leash. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. "Jeremy," he said, voice calm. "Everything okay?" I closed my eyes for a second, steadying my breath. "Yeah," I lied. "We've got something. New documents. Maybe the final nail. Can you meet us?" "Where?" "The museum. Service entrance. Midnight." "Got it." He hung up. I turned to Heather. "We record everything." She nodded. "What are we hoping he says?" "Anything," I said. "But even if he doesn't, we'll have him on video trying to clean up the mess." We spent the next 6 hours wiring the room with hidden cameras, syncing audio feeds to Stephanie Rios's laptop, and positioning Edward, now recovered enough to walk, as a silent witness in the corner. Midnight came. Marcus arrived alone. Leather jacket. Calm eyes. No badge. He looked around the room like a man checking for ghosts. "You said you had something," he said. I handed him a folder empty. He flipped it open, frowned. "What is this?" "Your test," I said softly. He froze. "You were sloppy, Marcus," I continued. "You left a trail." His eyes narrowed. "I helped you." "No. You contained us, redirected us, until we got too close." He laughed once, short and humorless. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." "I understand perfectly," I said. "KRJ Holdings. Geneva. The sealed account." He looked at Heather. "You should be careful who you trust, young lady." "You mean like we trusted you?" she snapped. Then Edward stepped forward into the light. Marcus's face changed. "You're supposed to be gone," Edward said. "You tried." Marcus took a step back. But Heather was faster. She locked the door. "You're not leaving," I said. "This time, you answer our questions." He looked at me and smiled. "Then I guess it's time you meet the others." Marcus said it like a joke, but no one laughed. Heather stepped back, hand subtly moving toward her phone to trigger the hidden audio stream. Edward stood stiff, lips pressed tight, ready to lunge if needed. I stood my ground. "Who are the others, Marcus?" He chuckled again, like he was amused by how little we really understood. "You think this was all about your artifacts? A forged placard. A $5 million deal." I didn't blink. He continued. "That was just the doorway. The real operation started long before Philip, before Stephanie, even before KRJ Holdings." He looked at the camera lens hidden in the bookshelf. Dead center. He knew. "They won't stop this," he said. "You think one conference, one article, one angry professor shouting into a microphone is going to collapse an institution? We've bought universities, museums, galleries. Hell, we own 3 Indigenous archives, legal ones." Heather's face twisted in disbelief. "Why?" Marcus looked at her. "Because heritage is power, and the people who control it shape the narrative. History is currency, and we've been laundering it for years." He paused, then turned back to me. "You weren't supposed to notice. You were the old man, the legacy scholar they could parade at openings, until you started digging too deep." I took a step closer. "And what now? You kill us? Discredit us again?" He smiled. "No. You join us." The room froze. "You're a symbol, Jeremy," he said. "The grandfather of ethical curation. If you back off now, publicly, you get your name back. A seat on our board. A quiet retirement. Your daughter? She gets a tenure-track position at any university she wants." Heather's voice came out like steel. "You're bribing us." "I'm offering survival." Edward stepped forward. "And if we refuse?" Marcus looked him up and down. "You won't like the alternative." Heather's phone buzzed, an incoming message from Stephanie Rios. FBI requesting everything you have. Official inquiry launched. I looked Marcus in the eye. You're not the only ones watching. That wiped the grin from his face. For the first time, Marcus looked uncertain, but only for a second. He pulled out his phone and tapped something. Heather's laptop, across the room, shut off. The lights dimmed. Edward gasped. I ran to the window. The museum's backup generator had just gone offline. Marcus backed toward the door. You just made your choice. And then, the fire alarm went off. The fire alarm blared, shrill and violent, echoing off the marble walls of the museum like a war drum. Red strobes pulsed against the glass cases, making every artifact seem like it was glowing with warning. Heather covered her ears. Edward clutched the ledger like it was a child. I stared at the dark screen of her laptop, Marcus's final move before slipping into the shadows. We weren't just in a fire drill. We were being flushed out. Back exit. I shouted over the alarm. Now, we ran. The halls, usually silent and sacred, were now chaos. Overhead lights flickering, emergency sirens screaming, smoke beginning to leak from somewhere deep in the archive wing. Heather looked at me, her eyes wide. Is it real? I don't know, I said, but we can't take the risk. Sprinklers exploded overhead, dousing the walls in cold water. I turned once, long enough to see the display cases we'd curated for decades, now soaked and exposed. The past was literally being washed away. As we rounded the corner toward the staff exit, two figures in security uniforms stepped into our path. I slowed. They didn't move. Jeremy Grant, one of them asked, though he already knew the answer. Heather gripped my arm. Edward whispered, "They're not with the museum." I played dumb. "Is there a fire?" The shorter one reached for something under his jacket. That's when Edward did the unthinkable. He threw the ledger, not at them, but away, down the adjacent hall. Both men turned. "Run," I shouted. We ducked past them as they bolted after the flying documents, Heather grabbing Edward by the arm and dragging him toward the basement stairwell. We burst through the door and into darkness. One flashlight, flickering, stale air, concrete steps, silence beneath the chaos. We kept moving until we hit the bottom. There, in the emergency vault chamber, lay our salvation. A private archive locker built in the 80s, analog, off-grid, never digitized. And dry. We barricaded the door. Heather caught her breath. What now? I looked around the dusty room. Old files, forgotten records, film reels, print photos, evidence that predates everything. Marcus had disabled our electronics, but he couldn't erase analog. Edward dropped into a chair, wheezing. He tried to burn the truth, but he lit the wrong fire. I finished. Heather pulled out a disposable phone we'd bought weeks ago for backup. One number pre-programmed. She hit send. The phone buzzed once. Then a voice answered. "This is Agent Brittany Torres, Cultural Crimes Division." Heather's voice was clear. "We're under attack, and we've got everything." Torres didn't hesitate. "Hold your position. I've already mobilized a federal team. We just needed confirmation that the ledger still exists." I looked down at Edward's hands, still clutching it. It had a tear in the corner, some water damage, but still whole, still real. Heather nodded. "It does." Torres replied, calm but electric. "Then it's time. We go public in 48 hours. Be ready." But before Heather could answer, the vault door shook. Someone was outside, trying to break in. The vault door groaned. Metal on metal. Someone or something was pressing from the other side. Heather's eyes locked with mine. "They found us." I nodded. "We don't have much time." Edward looked pale but determined. "We can't let them in. Not before the Bureau has it all." Heather pulled out the disposable phone again. "We need to transmit the files now." "No signal down here," I said. "Too deep. That's why this room was chosen for analog records. No reception. No tracking. No help." Outside, another bang. Closer. Angrier. "We need a way out," Heather said, her voice quickening. I scanned the room. thinking fast. Then I remembered. Back in '95, they installed an emergency chute for film reels, fireproof, pressure-sealed. Lead straight to the loading bay dumpster behind the south wing. Heather blinked. "You're serious?" I pointed. "Behind that cabinet." We shoved it aside, revealing a square hatch barely wide enough for a person, let alone three. "Edward goes first," I said. "He's the weakest right now. Then the ledger. Then you." "And you?" Heather asked. I hold them off. She started to argue. I stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. "You're the future. I'm the echo." She teared up. "No, you're the reason this legacy matters." We both knew there was no time. Edward climbed in with a grunt. Heather passed him the sealed case with the ledger inside. Another crash hit the vault door. Dents were forming. They were using tools now. Heather hesitated, then kissed my cheek. "Don't die, Dad." No promises. She disappeared into the chute. I turned back to the door. It bulged. Screws snapping. Hinges cracking. I grabbed a crowbar from the archive shelf and wedged it into the floor frame. It wouldn't stop them, but it might by 30 seconds. I took one last look around. Then I dropped a flash drive behind a false panel near the light switch. If they destroyed everything else, maybe someone would find this. The door exploded inward. 3 men. Tactical gear. No insignias. One raised his voice. "Where is it?" I smiled. "Gone." He stepped forward. And just as he did, sirens howled from outside the museum. Floodlights. Shouts. FBI. Hands in the air. The men spun toward the vault entrance, but it was too late. Flashbang. White light. Chaos. And then, darkness. Light returned in fragments. Voices shouting. Footsteps on stone. The cold grip of a medic's glove on my wrist. I opened my eyes. FBI agents surrounded the vault. The intruders were face down on the floor, zip-tied, their arrogance stripped like their weapons. Agent Brittany Torres knelt beside me. "Mr. Grant, it's over." I sat up slowly. My ribs ached. My throat was raw, but I was breathing. "The ledger?" I asked. She smiled. "Delivered. Your daughter and Edward are safe. Already debriefing at HQ." I nodded once. Let the tears fall. Not from fear. From relief. 2 days later, the Bureau held a press conference. Federal charges filed against Philip, Stephanie, Marcus, and 6 others. International arrest warrants issued for collaborators overseas. The museum board dissolved pending full investigation. Artifacts recovered. Repatriation negotiations resumed. But what mattered most? The truth was public. Heather and I stood on the museum steps as reporters swarmed us. Edward watched from a bench nearby, recovering, but finally free. This wasn't just about theft, I told the crowd. It was about erasure. People who think culture is just decoration, who believe history is only valuable if it can be owned. I looked out at the faces before me. Heritage is not for sale, and justice isn't something you archive. It breathes. It remembers. And today it speaks. That night, the museum was quiet again, but it felt different. Sacred again. Heather and I stood in the same gallery Philip once tried to claim. Only now, the placards told the full story. One of preservation, survival, and betrayal overcome. She looked at me. "You did it, Dad." I shook my head. We did it. And we weren't finished. I started writing again. Not grant proposals or exhibition scripts, but testimony, essays, a book, not about what we lost, but about what we reclaimed. And every chapter began the same way. My name is Jeremy Grant. I was a witness, and now I'm the record. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.